everybody, and welcome to Responsible AI in Action, where we are interviewing some of the greatest leaders in the responsible AI movement. I am so excited to be speaking with Elizabeth Adams today. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I am super excited to be here.
I'm really excited to have you here because you are really forging yourself as a leader in the space. I know that you were recently recognized in Forbes as 15 AI ethics leaders, showing the world the way of the future. And just so much of what you're doing in your research and what you're focusing on as it specifically relates to AI, the harms, the potential good with it as well, is very fascinating. So I'm wondering if we could start with your background. How did you begin working in responsible AI?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I've been a technologist for over 2 decades. And so I've led large scale technology initiatives. I've had large teams up to 200, large budgets. And my leadership philosophy was always around equity, equality, and inclusion. And whether that was pay equity, whether that meant how my team composition looked, all of those things. And so that's been a part of my philosophy. So when I started to see about 8 years ago how AI was making its way into society, I noticed right off the bat that it wasn't working for everyone. And I wanted to go explore that. And that's what I did. There are some pioneers in this space, Dr. Joy Buolamwini, Dr. Ruha Benjamin, that I followed and began to understand a little bit more about how those impacts might affect communities of color and vulnerable populations. So I was working for an organization at the time, and I started conducting learning events. And through those learning events, I started talking with data scientists and executives and learned that there was a real interest in understanding what was happening. And so from that, I got engaged with the city of Minneapolis as an appointee for the Racial Equity Community Advisory Committee, and again began to explore how policymaking and community, what might that look like in the age of AI? And so from that perspective, I just began to keep talking with people and started leading various efforts around this multi-stakeholder approach to responsible AI. Now, when I started, it wasn't called responsible AI, it was AI ethics. And so, so that's really was how I got interested, was just I saw that AI wasn't working for everyone, specifically communities of color and vulnerable populations.
Absolutely. And I think what I really enjoy about your work is the focus on that as well, because that is a whole element to it, is the focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, how the AI is being created. Would you say that's a big reason why I know that you're pursuing a PhD at the moment in responsible AI as well? Is that part of the reason why you're so committed to this mission? How do you foresee the landscape playing out in this field?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And honestly, my reason for pursuing a doctorate in leadership of responsible AI was because I understood that from the technology development design perspective, there were people that are impacted by it, but they were not necessarily included in that design development. So as I started to see a number of wonderful organizations stand up responsible AI principles and definitions, I also began to see that there weren't enough people, this multi-stakeholder approach in creating the artifacts that would guide systems. And so I wanted to go explore why. And for those organizations that do a really good job, I wanted to find out what their best practices were of including broader employee stakeholders. And so that's my lens versus a diversity and inclusion. It's broader stakeholder engagement. And so beginning to ask those questions like, who are the stakeholders, the key employee stakeholders that organizations should be looking at, and what is their engagement in responsible AI, and more specifically, the artifacts that guide. So your policies, your principles, your frameworks, your employee handbooks, all of those things guide the development and design of how an organizational culture moves towards responsible AI. So that was my initial interest. And I've conducted my research, so I'm writing up my findings. And honestly, it's been really fascinating to see how some organizations are incorporating responsible AI so that it's an integral part of the experience, the organization and employee experience. And then where some organizations are having some hiccups and they're stalling. For me, it also took me out of the work of leading certain initiatives because I wanted to have greater impacts. I wanted to take a step back and talk to people and learn from people, and then create, through my doctoral program, a framework for how you engage broader stakeholders in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. The work that you're doing is laying the foundation for the years to come. And it's exciting. I'm hopeful to see how AI progresses. I'm wondering if we could turn the conversation to that a little bit. Some recent news around deepfakes has been very prevalent recently. We know here for the stories with what happened with Taylor Swift, also what's going on with the elections as well. I would love to hear your take on, because I know you have a strong background in AI harm as well and the implications with that. What are your interpretations of what's happening in the world of deep fakes? And is there a way that we could fix this current issue?
So I will say this, there's always going to be bad actors whenever the next generation of fascinating AI tools come out. There's always going to be bad actors. And most of the time, we don't know about them until after something like you just mentioned, the things you mentioned happen. But we've had some experience for a while as a society for the past couple of years. And this is with bad actors and deep fakes. And this is where I think a couple of different things. We absolutely need regulation because in my research and talking with a number of employees, even if they suggest certain things, it doesn't necessarily mean the organization might adopt certain principles in their responsible AI practice yet. And so they have a number of things that they have to consider. However, we absolutely, I think, need regulation around that. Part of the challenge is it makes it so difficult because there are a lot of people like myself who are having fun with, let's say, an app like DID, where I can create some really fun, exciting content to draw people into the work that I do, but it also lends itself to some harms. I do know that there are organizations out there that are helping to watermark so that we can quickly identify when something is a deep fake. But I do have concerns because I speak to thousands of people across the world who are just now learning about the power of AI. And so I do worry about what I consider AI harm, which is a negative human experience as a result of AI system outputs. So I am concerned about that. My work, again, inside organizations, working with employees to be engaged, I'm hoping and I'm hopeful that will help eliminate some of those challenges.
And have you seen the inverse of that? What are some examples that you might have seen of AI for good?
Let me just say this. I don't necessarily know if it's AI for good, but this is where there's something that's very exciting for me happening. Again, in my research, as I mentioned, there are people, communities of color, vulnerable populations who have not necessarily been a part of these tools that are in the marketplace today. But I am seeing strong communities rise that are able to use some of these tools because generative AI has helped democratize access. So maybe they're in rural deserts, maybe they're in parts of the world where you wouldn't get a speaker to come and talk to them about how to forge forward with generative AI. But there's these social communities where people engage and they're learning how to responsibly use the tools. And they're also learning how to let the vendors know when they see stereotypes, let's just say in image generation, or when a system is hallucinating because they're learning how to test. Or you have professors who are allowing their students to use generative AI tools. And then they're also, through that experience, identifying where it may have gone awry. So I'm excited to see this work go beyond the traditional AI emphasis and actually involve more people around the world who are speaking up and advocating for themselves.
And it's looking forward into a hopeful future is certainly, as I mentioned before, it's the foundation of what we're building at the Institute, what you're doing in your work as well. So it'll be very fascinating for sure to see how things play out. Elizabeth, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to join us on the show again. Before we part ways, I'm wondering if you could just share with everyone where they could find out more information about you and your work.
Oh, sure. First off, I can't believe the conversation's over. That was so wonderful. And thank you for having me. So, my website is eadams.tech. So, you can find out what I'm doing. You can connect with me if you want me to come and speak to your organization. I also have children's books. You can find those at emabooks.com. And I have one that's right behind it called Little AI and PD that teaches parents and caregivers about safe technology. And then also, I'm very active on LinkedIn. So find me on LinkedIn, Elizabeth M. Adams, and I would love to connect and talk responsible AI.
Awesome. For all of our viewers out there, we'll make sure to include those links to those various resources in our show description. So be sure to check it out, everyone tuning in. Elizabeth, thank you so much again.
Thank you.